What do you know about eugenics in Western Canada? The second Alberta Eugenics Awareness Week was held in October of 2012. The week began with a team meeting of the Living Archives on Eugenics in Western Canada project. The week included talks by Karen Stout on the sterilization of Aboriginal and First Nations women, a reading of the play Invisible Child, written by David Terce, Leilani Muir, and Lou Morin, an event at City Hall in Edmonton commemorating the 40th anniversary of the repeal of the Sexual Sterilization Act of Alberta. A Person's Day panel discussion on feminism, Indigenous well-being, and linguicide, and a performative art show, Cryptese, an evening of irreverent art on disability and sexuality. This is the highlight video of that week. Additional interviews with Sandra Anderson, Colette Leung, and Leslie Cormack give special insight about the historical context of eugenics and its contemporary relevance. What do you know about eugenics in Western Canada?
Welcome everyone, and thank you for letting us join you. My name is David Terce. I'm the playwright of this piece, working alongside Leilani and Lou Morin, who were instrumental in crafting this piece, Invisible Child. I'd like to introduce Linda Grass, Randy Brasowski, and Jenny McKillop, who performed this show about 8 weeks ago at the Edmonton Fringe Festival.
This is the story
of Leilani O'Malley,
of unearthing the truth about the Alberta Eugenics Law,
of a court case that changed the way Albertans looked at themselves.
I'm Sandra Anderson, and I practiced law with Field LLP before my retirement a year ago, and I was counsel for Leilani Muir and the other sterilization victims for a number of years of my practice.
This is the story
of how our legal system was effective in reversing a decades-old wrong,
Of a classic David and Goliath fight, of one person against the
of
government.
an extraordinary woman who overcame tremendous hardships in order to finally settle into her own voice.
We talk about
Courage,
Conflict,
constitutional challenges as we
piece together
dissect the moments that lead up to one of the most important cases in Alberta's history.
in our
touching portrait,
Documentary,
gripping courtroom drama. Told in passionate documentary style.
welcome.
Today I'm really pleased to welcome Karen Stout from University of New Brunswick.
I must admit I was really excited to hear about Rob and his team and the work they've been doing here in Alberta, because there's very little work that's been done on eugenics in Canada. Involuntary sterilization is a practice that arose out of the eugenics movement in the early 1900s. And the idea behind it was that the illness and the poverty and the many social problems that were manifesting themselves at the time were the result of some sort of innate biological characteristics of individuals rather than the way society was being organized at the time. And so as the industrial capitalist mode of production expanded, many private interest groups considered it more cost-effective to intervene and stop these so-called problem groups from reproducing rather than implement broader social measures, things like better nutrition and wages, and generally just creating a more inclusive society for everyone. Sterilization became a cost-effective method of addressing what were in fact social problems.
Basically, the Sexual Sterilization Act was enacted in 1928 to respond to a movement which said that if we improve the breeding stock of people, we will start to wipe out all of the scourges of humanity. So the idea was that if you put people into confined institutions and you sterilize them so that they could not carry on their deficiencies, society would gradually improve.
the Sexual Sterilization Act, 1928. When it is proposed to discharge any inmate of a mental hospital, the medical superintendent may cause the inmate to be examined by a board.
No board interview, no discharge.
If upon such examination, the board is unanimously of opinion that the patient might safely be discharged if the danger of procreation, with its attendant risk of multiplication of the evil by transmission of disability to progeny, or eliminated
If you have a genetic disease which might get passed along,
the board may direct a surgical operation for sexual sterilization of the inmate.
you don't get out unless you get sterilized.
My paper is called Attacks on Historical Memory and the Politics of Archives, How Decisions Are Made and Who Makes Them.
So my name's Colette Leung. I am a joint student in the Library Science Program and Humanities Computing here at the University of Alberta. Before I was brought onto the Living Archives project, I hadn't even heard of Leilani, and I hadn't actually known about even what eugenics meant as a term. I remember being asked to work on the project and then going home and looking up on Wikipedia, like, what is eugenics, right?
One facet of this project is the digitization of extant and to be accumulated paper archives, as well as the creation of oral histories captured on digital video. The purpose of this digitization is not solely to make paper archives available online through links, but also to package the digital content for use in the school curriculum.
I think very few Albertans know about it. I'm actually more surprised when someone knows about it than when someone doesn't. We very much shape what we think Alberta's history should be, and so it's not really something that we talk about a lot, right?
The Living Archives project is achieving lofty but not impossible goals. Perhaps the greatest of these are the validation of personal and collective memories so they may transform present and future generations' understanding of the past.
In 1937, it was determined that the board was taking too long to make its decisions. After that, you could be sterilized even if your perceived defect wasn't genetic. Oh, and if you were a mental defective, they no longer needed to get anyone's permission.
Most sterilizations occurred at either the Alberta Hospital in Ponoka or the Provincial Training School in Red Deer.
The government would like to remind all Albertans that it was the Progressive Conservatives who repealed the Act in 1972.
After 2,800 people were sterilized.
It should be stated that I, like Leilani, was sterilized at the tender age of 14 at the Radio Institution. We never should have been sterilized. She would have been a wonderful, wonderful mother. I see how she treats her pets, how she's so kind to others, how she cooks wonderful meals, keeps a clean home. You couldn't ask for more. A fine example of a fine woman.
I'm Leslie Cormack. I am a historian of science at the University of Alberta. I'm presently the Dean of the Faculty of Arts. I do think that it's important to learn about eugenics in the education system. It is the case that many people have never heard of this.
Sexual sterilization was achieved through surgical intervention on the reproductive systems of citizens deemed less fit. Their procreation was held to pose an, quote, attendant risk of multiplication of the evil by transmission of the disability to progeny. The foundation of eugenics is the idea that through the agency of governments and social organizations and institutions, and via individual decision, society can and should alter for the better what sorts of people there are in future generations.
For me, the message of the eugenics movement is that good people who think that they are doing good for society and even for the people that they are treating can be misled, can do things in the name of science, in the name of progress, that actually have shattering consequences.
The people in the 1920s who advocated for the introduction of the Sexual Sterilization Act were well-meaning. They were certainly well-known and very powerful. Emily Murphy, Louise McKinney, Nellie McClung, the President of the University of Alberta, the National Council of Women, the United Farm Women of Alberta, the list goes on and on. These people were well-meaning, they were passionate, and they were wrong.
We got to keep talking about this so it never happens again, because my belief is history repeats. If we shut up about it, it will repeat. So I got to keep talking about it all over the world, and hopefully we can stop it everywhere.
So this is a day on which we remember the legacy of Edwards v. Canada and of the 5 Canadian first-wave feminists who were responsible for this legal victory. If the victory in Edwards was both fundamentally important and also narrow, the legacy of the famous 5 is also very fraught, as we all know. Though passionate advocates for women's citizenship rights, These women were at the same time anti-immigration and also explicitly racist. As everyone in this room knows, the women who struggled for women's inclusion in legal personhood were proponents of eugenics. McClung promoted the benefits of sterilization, particularly for, quote, young, simple-minded girls. Emily Murphy, particularly in her nom de plume Janie Canuck, railed against the unrestricted breeding by the feeble-minded, and she argued that insane people are not entitled to progeny. As Karen Stote argued in her talk on Monday, eugenics was explicitly rationalized as a cost-effective solution to social problems.
When I was originally asked to talk about eugenics, I was a bit stumped, not because there isn't ample examples of eugenics type projects being carried out among Indigenous people in Canada, as Lise has just talked to, but because I don't do a lot of work in eugenics, kind of as narrowly conceived. And also because in kind of the post-war era in Canada, we've kind of moved away from the eliminatory policies that are part and parcel of kind of eugenicist logics, and we started moving towards what in Indigenous studies we tend to talk about as the improvement era, right? So this whole idea of integrating Indigenous people into the Canadian body politic.
Just as some parents might have been complicit in seeking sterilization of their children, some parents have been complicit in hastening language loss by immigrating away from their home communities, by intermarrying, by not speaking their heritage language to their children. Unquestionably, language diversity is on a sharp decline. You know, eugenics is all tied up in purity, and human beings are not pure, nor cultures, nor our languages.
Do you have slender trouble?
When you see a fat person eating, are you reminded of what you've had to sacrifice in order to fit into that tiny box called normal?
Have you accepted self-denial as part of a balanced diet?
Is it possible your slenderness is a phase you'll grow out of?
Are you afraid you're going to catch the obesity?
Maybe from a toilet seat.
Or from drinking from a fat person's glass?
Or maybe from not washing your hands after touching a hamburger.
When you go out with your fat friends...
You have fat friends, right?
Do you choose places with right tight booths that will bruise their guts? Chairs with arms that will hug their butts?
Spots you enter by too many stairs, with rickety old chairs that you worry would quit. Lickety-split if I ate just a bit more shit.
Once you start learning about it, it starts kind of seeping into everything. You start to see how eugenics plays into our lives a lot every single day, and not just in these very definite sexual sterilization, like not just the definite laws that existed, but even in how we go about our lives now. You know, you go see X-Men and you realize the entire premise behind X-Men is whether or not mutants should be allowed to live or to procreate. And, you know, so it's in pop culture, but we don't really think about it as like, oh, that's eugenics, right? So much of this people, I think, you know, the Sexual Sterilization Act ended in 1972, it's done and gone, but it really isn't. And they're very important conversations to have, and they're not black and white.
You think of all of the work that's now being done on the prediction of sex of unborn children. And that's social engineering that is now possible medically Well, that's eugenics.
We'll never be through with it, I don't think, until we value individuals, each individual, as different, perhaps, but entirely of the quality and the worth of every other individual. Nobody, not one of us, is able to do that successfully all the time. And no system can be set up which actually does that. And that's our problem.
In closing, it was certainly a dark, very dark chapter in Alberta's history, but one that we should never forget.